Is a truncated version of a lecture that was recently given at Lady Margaret Hall as a keynote for the doctoral training partnership between the OU and Oxford and Cambridge to their PhD students, and it was called Handling the Black Box: How Will We Protect and Learn from Indigenous Traditional Knowledge in the Age of Machine Learning. And the reason I'm giving this truncated version is because although there were some wonderful students there from MIT and Stockholm and all the wonderful universities involved, our own students here at the University of Hull also wanted to know what was said. So I'm making this brief recording just so that everyone has access to it in a wider sense, in case there's something of value there for young PhD students as they're thinking about the future. Okay, so the overall message of the lecture was that the arts and humanities as a scholarship community have a crucial role to play as the fourth industrial revolution unfolds. And I think that role is providing irreducible moral worth informed by complexity, diversity, and nuance. That's the overall point of the lecture. So what follows is a discussion that involves science. Bear in mind that this DTP conference was about entanglements, which is called entanglements, which is a word borrowed from quantum computing and from the sciences and migrated into the arts and humanities. The discussion is going to involve science, and particularly discussion of what's known as the GRIN technologies, so genetics, robotics, information, AI, nanotechnology, but also quantum computing. And these I consider, the really big technological changes that are with us or about to really impact on everyone's lives. Very emergent and conceptually big advances. Now, my bet is that people will be ready to think about this within the arts and humanities and think about the fourth industrial revolution technological changes, because the arts and humanities are accepting more and more the conceptual ideas that the sciences are putting forward, ideas like entanglement as a key one, which is a quantum term. And if you look back in history, the arts and humanities have always been in relationship to the sciences. So we've taken on board concepts like kinetic or power, a big theme, or even evolution as an idea is very much a crossover concept. I think the best way to look at the current use of the idea of entanglement is to say that it's something in interdiscursive dialogue with STEM subjects such as physics and maths, and it's being used in the arts and humanities. I want to say a little bit more about this borrowing from the arts and humanities of entanglement as an idea. I think we can summarize why the concept of entanglement has proven attractive across many discourses. And I'm thinking here of philosophy, social sciences, but maybe particularly it's been popular to people working in intercultural studies, global history, global art history, and in literatures of globalization. And it's a wonderfully expansive and unlimiting concept. And in particular, since the 1990s, it's, I think, particularly suited conditions of globalization. Now, within the arts and humanities, it's really hard to find an agreed definition of entanglement, this concept that's come from the sciences. But quite a few scholars speak of flow and flux and enmeshed, interwoven growth and movements. I'm thinking of Tim Ingold's book, Bringing Things to Life from 2003. And people have written that they prefer entanglement to previous ways of looking at the world that involve finite points of origin, such as understanding phenomena in terms of networks or connection. They've got a finite point of beginning. And when people have used entanglements and the entanglement idea, they've often generated associated metaphors and envisaged entanglement as being analogous to things like fungal mycelium. So I'm thinking here of Alan Rayner's book, Degrees of Freedom. Or they've used the metaphor of rhizomes, Deleuze and Guattari, 1,000 plateaus, for example, there. Or spider webs. That's again Tim Ingold. He's used that metaphor. So it's been, I suppose, reduced to that metaphor. And of course, any metaphor has pluses and minuses, but in a way, reduced. Post-colonial scholars have found the idea of entanglement particularly useful and generative when they look at exchange across cultures. So scholars such as Jean Dennison, who wrote Colonial Entanglement in 2012, she was very attracted to the approach because it allowed for uneven impacts across time. And then other books like Nicholas Thomas's Entangled Objects that came out in 1991, he used entanglement to unsettle the idea of reciprocity and to bring in resistance as a phenomena and to move thinking beyond ideas that were popular at that time like hybridity and syncretism. Now, some scholars such as Mary Louise Pratt, who wrote Imperial Eyes in 2007, they've argued that entanglement specifically characterizes the neo-colonial moment, that juncture when colonialism breaks down. And then a bit more recently, in 2016, there were books such as Debjani Ganguly's This Thing Called the World, the contemporary novel as global form. And this spoke of global entanglement and hyperconnectivity, and called for aesthetic forms that could encompass what was called the hell of a violently entangled world histories. Other writers like William Connolly, Facing the Planetary, he wrote Entangled Humanism 2017, advocated something called entangled humanism, and talked about political swarming movements or honeybee democracy, which is another idea from Thomas D. Seeley. And the idea there is to use honeybee democracy or swarming to tackle the power of corporations and address problems that arise on a planetary scale. So if I show you this slide, you can see some of these books and you can see how they've been represented. Fascinating that this one in the middle, for example, it's all in English, those layers that they've created on that kind of inside of a golf ball image for the world. I think the reduction to a metaphor of a scientific term and scientific concepts, and in some cases military industrial scientific concepts, are fascinating. So much to the good. These are all wonderful books, and they're the tip of the iceberg, really, of recent texts using this idea of entanglement. Well, what's the problem with that? What is problematic about using entanglement as a concept if it proves good to think with? And in one level, there's nothing wrong with that. However, there are two issues in my mind that I think could be problematic. One is that entanglement and its critical languages of things being irrevocably related, of complexity, connectedness, contingency, it can make things that are actually deeply contested and accessible to change, and not at all at the quantum level, because entanglement's actually linked to quantum physics and so forth. It can make things like forced migration or the spread of AI-informed technologies, it can make all these things seem natural or a fait accompli or inevitable, and it can work to drain our analysis of immediate politics, and it can sideline some of the more usual strategies for addressing the asymmetries of power that may result from these big shifts that we're all living through. Second bigger problem I have with all of the use of entanglement by and certain other scientific or scientistic terms within the arts and humanities is to do with what happens when what's really a period-defining scientific idea like entanglement gets adopted and used critically and sometimes very loosely to define inquiry outside of science and at a completely different scale. And sometimes it loses direct relationship to the original idea altogether, but at the same time it retains some of the patina of exceptional intellectual value that the sciences have built up. So there can be a lot of slippage between ideas when they get migrated across disciplines. But as I said, these are brilliant books. Why does this matter now more than it might have mattered at any other time? My answer is that we need internally generated within the arts and humanities commentary and critical thinking at this juncture in history as never before. We need awareness of multiplicity, of the marginalized, or we need creative approaches to what's ill-defined or undefinable, not as frills, but as qualities vital to human survival on an individual, collective, and species level. The humanities are essential to us creating the ethical and moral world that we want, rather than a world designed by technology and corporations. Perhaps it's only the arts and humanities that can give us the equipment to differentiate between what we can do as a species and what really we should be doing. We need to bring to the fore all the things that define the humane, ethical world that we want to bring into existence. So we need imagination, curiosity, communication, compassion, empathy, social advocacy, more now than we've ever needed them. Why? Why now? Why does all this particularly matter right now? Well, let's just start with artificial intelligence. That's that one part of the fourth industrial revolution tsunami of change that's coming or here. With AI, it's the first tool in history that can make decisions by itself. Atom bombs can't go off by themselves, but autonomous weapon systems can, if permitted, decide who to kill and when within parameters set by us. And of course, the real concern in warfare going forward is the speed at which any future conflict is likely to take place when it's AI informed. Our war-making machines are able to make decisions at speeds we cannot cope with as humans. We just can't. We don't have the stack, as it were, intellectually to work at that speed. Second issue with AI is it's a tool that we may willingly allow to take significant power away from us. Already more and more decisions that shape our lives are being decided, at least in part, by artificial intelligence. So I'm thinking of things such as who gets a mortgage, who gets a loan, who gets selected for a job interview, who gets sentenced what in judicial review. Perhaps most concerningly for us in the arts and humanities is that more and more ideas and stories and images are being created not by humans, but by AI. Up to now, humans have made all the art and stories and theatre and imagery. Now, another means of generating intelligence is increasingly making these things for us. And we don't always fully understand how it does it, how it produces coherence and beautiful, convincing prose, albeit prose that sometimes isn't always correct because AI hallucinates. Third issue is that all this is happening very fast. It's now common for generations to have to cope with the unimaginable when they were young, and for those things to become the unimaginable when they were young to become ordinary later in life. That's becoming more normal for generations. AI systems are growing at exceptional speed, and those that are capable of what's called deep learning are optimized to self-learn and teach themselves. And already they outperform humans in chess since the late 1990s, and then more recently in complex strategy games like Go. So we are about overall to go from a data-driven set of ways of making decisions to AI-informed ones, which is a completely different way of informing how we make choices. There's actually a real issue with that. Anyway, leaving the AI revolution to one side and going back to this idea of entanglement, let's consider what's important about the concept and what might actually have gotten lost that we're using AI today. And we have had strikes already in the creative realm, but I don't think that kind of resistance to AI is by any chance over. So when we go back to looking at entanglement and what might have got lost in its journey from the sciences, inevitably for an arts and humanities person to start talking about it, they're taking a phenomenal risk because you're trying to comprehend things that you can only have taken baby steps in because you are an arts and humanities person. But I'm determined to try because I think that's a good political choice to make, because if we continue to simply accept it at a metaphorical level without at least attempting some kind of more in-depth understanding, I think a great deal is lost, and I don't think we can afford to continue to do that. I think it's dangerous for arts and humanities scholars at this juncture in history to just simply invoke key terms from science as metaphors. We need to engage more deeply with scientific innovation. In essence, the sciences can't be left alone with this enormous scale and depth of change, and I don't think they actually want to be entirely left alone, particularly when it comes to the ethical implications of this change. So entanglement actually comes from quantum computing, quantum networking, quantum cryptography, condensed matter physics, fundamental physics, chemistry, and lots of work being done on the nature of space and time. And unlike how entanglement is often talked about in the arts and humanities, where writers talk of communication happening somehow across great distances, in science they talk of particles being intrinsically correlated, not so much communicating, more that they somehow are as one. Somehow a synergy occurs between entangled systems, not so much connecting them to one another as allowing them to know how to be connected, which is truly mind-blowing, really, when one tries to comprehend it. Hundreds of molecules, apparently, in the human body can become entangled, and this also happens in certain metals and magnets. Einstein was one of the people to describe the phenomena in 1935, and the idea that two particles could correlate with each other over great distances really bothered him, because it seemed to mean that they could communicate faster than the speed of light, which is impossible. But since 1935, entanglement has been proven to be true. If you have two non-interacting but entangled particles, you can get them to entangle using microwaves, I think. You can ascribe a definite position and momentum to the second one across large distances, which is truly phenomenal. So if you have two non-interacting but entangled particles, you can ascribe a definite position and momentum to the second one across a large distance. If we are to adopt something from this that's usable in the arts and humanities, reasonably, it might only be that our universe is intermediate between the local and the non-local, that there's a correlation between the local and the non-local at the quantum level, but still nothing travels faster than light in a vacuum, and scale really matters. And I'm not sure how useful the arts and humanities would find that, but that's what seems to me reasonable to take from the amazing work the sciences are doing. One last fascinating point from things quantum. On the 14th of August 2023, not long ago, scientists in Ottawa and Rome used a new technique to visualize an entangled pair of photons, particles of light, and visualize their wave function. And in the paper that the scientists published as a result of this, they pointed out that and you can see it on this slide, the resulting image was very much like a Chinese yin-yang image, these non-interpenetrating swirls. And it also is very like 5th century Celtic art. Anyone who knows the Triskele symbol, for example, which is another strange thing, shall we say. Truly spooky, to use a term Einstein also applied, although the term really comes from Schrödinger, apparently. Another linked concept that no one in the arts talks about at all much is superposition, where particles can exist in two different states simultaneously. That is, up until the point they're measured, because the act of measuring a quantum state destroys it. One other thing that doesn't quite gel with how the arts and humanities have chosen to adopt this really mind-blowing set of ideas is that randomness is key to these quantum correlations. I don't understand how, because as I say, I'm on a journey trying to understand all of this, and I knew when I'd hit the buffers of my understanding, I don't understand how randomness works in any of this, even at the basic level that I'm understanding it. The really interesting thing, though, is that once you apply these breakthroughs in science and quantum computing, you can carry out truly enormous calculations. Things that for classical computers, like the one you're probably watching this on, would take millions of years. So classical computing, it works on ones and zeros, binary digits, or bits for short. But quantum computers work in qubits, which when they're placed in superposition, can be thought of as being both a 1 and a 0. They have degrees of oneness and degrees of zeroness. This means that a quantum computer, and this is one here, doesn't have to do one process at a time. And I've put a kind of joke definition of one there. Because what you see when you see these pictures of quantum computing, it's really a big fridge having to cool it down, and microwave cables cooling down the quantum computer inside. But they do look rather beautiful. The upshot of quantum computers is they could potentially speed up computing by factors of thousands, or some people say millions. In fact, one recent estimate said that a quantum computer could work at 158 million times faster than classical computing. And they may be about to take that leap from the lab into our lives, the same way classical computers moved from labs and large corporations into businesses and homes in the 70s and 80s. And if you think about the likely enormous impact that would have on our lives, it's truly amazing. The areas it's thought where quantum computing could make an enormous difference is in areas where there's millions of constantly changing variables. So things like weather forecasting, traffic, issues like that. Anywhere where you need to optimize. So probably very useful for large banks. Problem is though, quantum computers are real divas. They are really fragile, really sensitive, for example, to noise or to radiation. They have to be super cooled, that's why I say it's a big fridge, and they're cripplingly expensive. Plus, they could be, ultimately, what I call regressive progress. They could cause more problems than they actually solve. We've known, for example, since 1994 that they could wreck all of our current encryption, what we use to secure all our communications online, or all our military and commercial secrets. They all work, that encryption works, because no classical computer has the time to crack the code by trying all possible variations, whereas quantum computing, that's possible. That said, if we're ever truly going to get true artificial intelligence, it's probably going to come via quantum computing, I think. Anyway, us arts and humanities folk have used the entanglement concept in very specific ways where it's not always clear, to me at least, that they connect directly with what scientists are doing and saying, even when you take the most perfunctory attempt at trying to understand seriously what they're thinking and doing. I want to suggest that perhaps we're missing the bigger point within the arts and humanities, how scientific breakthroughs like these are likely to very soon change our world in ways where we need to foreground our very human needs, where we need help with big choices, such as how much of our human selves we're prepared to sacrifice, or Neuralink, in exchange for what this incipient new world has got to offer. I think that's where the arts and humanities can be most valuable, rather than trying to simply run with metaphor versions of extremely complex science ideas. You might be thinking, why is a historian based at a provincial UK university who works with various Indigenous intellectuals and communities bothered with all this science stuff? Why does this particularly impact on what she's doing? Well, it turns out that a lot of people across disciplines in the arts and humanities who care about the Indigenous world are really worried about technological changes that are emerging, and especially how they're going to impact Indigenous communities. They're worried that the fourth industrial revolution might bring with it a new giant wave of colonization, where the Indigenous world is reduced to assimilable and infinitely transferable, monetizable data. And I first started to realize how widespread this concern was when I went to a symposium at Harvard Law, which was a surprise to me that they'd be interested in this kind of thing, but they were. These are really some of the most powerful lawyers on the planet, and they were really concerned that the unprecedented threat that AI posed to Indigenous traditional knowledge and sovereignty was not being thought about enough, and they were right. Because AI can mass produce Indigenous art exceptionally easily, especially if linked to 3D printing. And it can rip objects out of their cultural and often sacred historical context and community context and take away a vital sets of means for cultural identity expression and remove people's livelihoods. Existing intellectual property law and cultural rights legislation is inadequate for meeting the challenge. Perhaps 2,000% more funding is going into AI development that's not AI ethics. And there is a real lack of diversity amongst the tech industry itself, the people who are making the decisions. One study found that globally only 12% of AI professionals were female, only 4% people of colour, and the numbers of Indigenous people were so low as they couldn't be gathered. Of course, cultural appropriation of Indigenous sovereign cultural property has always been a problem. Here's just one example from a community our Treaty Spaces research group had the honour of working with this previous summer out in Juneau, Alaska. The folk behind the Sealaska Heritage Institute. This is an Alaska Native corporation owned by over 25,000 Tlingit, Haida and Tsimshian shareholders. They control about 362,000 acres. Of course, that's only 1.6% of their traditional homelands. Interestingly, April 2020, the Tlingit were the first to sue a business in the US for copying a traditional Indigenous design. The Institute, with the family of traditional weaver represented here, Clarissa Rizal, filed a federal lawsuit against Nyman Marcus, who are based out of Dallas, and 11 other retailers for copyright infringement because they were selling for $2,555 a raven's tail knitted coat, which was actually a direct copy of a coat Clarissa Rizal had designed in 1996, herself reinscribing an intergenerational tribal design. You could say actually that what Clarissa wove, given that spiritually it involves a whole clan and ancestors across time, really is entangled. Ravenstail and Chilkat weavings have been worn this way for hundreds of years along the northwest coast in Canada. They are clan atu, sacred objects representing spiritual links to ancestors and often connected to noble families within their communities. And in a legal, if you're listening and you're a lawyer or legally inclined, what the Sealaska Heritage Institute used was the Federal Indian Arts and Crafts Act, which stipulates that if you market something as Indian, it has to be actually made by Indigenous people. Sealaska actually staged really a theft of the raven's tail idea and conceptual design had been to some extent rectified. Now, I could go on at length about a ritual burning of the imitated garment in August 2021. And here we have the wonderful Rosita Worrell, president of Sealaska Heritage Institute. And she was not able to comment because the Tlingit signed a non-disclosure agreement. But I can tell you that there was general delight amongst the community that this examples worldwide of theft of Indigenous design. But here's a few key examples. So Indian textile traditions were stolen in 21 by fast fashion chain H&M, and they were digitally printed and marketed as being linked to Indian artisanal design, and this resulted in a massive complaint by groups of Indian craftspeople. That's India and India. And the high-end fashion designer Isabelle Marant, she was accused of stealing the blouse design of the Mixe community of Santa Maria, Tlalhualtolpec in Oaxaca, southern Mexico, for a 2015 collection, and was selling it, I understand, at 2,000% more than you could buy it in Mexico for. Paul Smith's also gotten in trouble for this, for selling a Pakistani Peshawari Chapal leather sandal, renaming the sandal Robert, and again selling it for an extravagant price. And the Navajo on the bottom left there sued a company called Urban Outfitters because the Navajo name has been trademarked since 1943, and the Navajo felt they were being disrespected by Urban Outfitters for selling what you can see at the bottom there, Navajo flask, peace treaty feather necklace, and a particular favorite, Navajo hipster panty, whatever that is. What really is concerning on a wider scale, however, is, and this is true of climate change and other symptoms of technological modernity, is that the Indigenous world are, in essence, sounding the clarion call for something that's going to have much broader impact in all our lives. They're alerting us to a much wider potential loss of control, linking to this coming tsunami of technologically induced change. And this is going to affect every single one of us, fundamentally in the next 10 years, but certainly across our lifetimes if you're alive today. So I'm thinking in particular about things like AI-informed facial recognition technology, surveillance software, digital twinning, what it might be like to have a AI self who you've trained via reinforced learning with human feedback possibly to pretty much behave and think and desire the way you do. What it might be like living with cobots that are trained to meet your needs, and whether, full stop, neurolinking is a good idea. What happens with all these things to our privacy, our autonomy, our security, how we allow ourselves to interact with computers is a personal and species decision that's both ethical and has myriad repercussions. And what happens if we don't is an equally important question. What happens if we don't do any of these things? And when you think about how humans have coped with the much smaller technological change linked to social media, it gives you some inkling of the potential ramifications of these enormous changes linked to the GRIN technologies, genetics, robotics, information, nanotechnology, and also AI and the quantum revolution. So one of the special concerns is to do with what's called black box AI, and this links to the title of the lecture. That's where AI and how it works is kept secret because of the intellectual property involved, or where deep learning is involved. Deep learning is where there's a stacked hierarchy of machine learning algorithms that get more and more complex as you go up the hierarchy. Basically, the input data that's used to train it is transformed in a non-linear way before it becomes an output. Black box AI means a human will find it difficult to identify, for example, why biased outputs might be happening, or who's going to be responsible if a dangerous or bad outcome occurs. If you don't know what's going on in the AI process, it's hard to find someone to blame or make responsible. The black box issue applies to things like driverless cars, certain medical AI applications. And in essence, if you're trusting a black box system, you're also trusting the database that it was built from. So many tech entrepreneurs today have been thinking about these issues and have been coming into the arts and humanities world for answers to how they're going to deal with this level of change. And one philosopher they're particularly fascinated by is William MacAskill at Oxford. And his thinking, very commendably, he thinks in terms of deep time and the long term. And he makes the case that this period we're living in is very special. And of course, by implication, that makes tech entrepreneurs very special. And in essence, MacAskill argues that people alive today are the kind of young Turks in the big long story of humanity's likely millennia long lifespan as a mammalian species. And he wrote a book all about this called What We Owe the Future, came out in 2022, influenced by another writer called Derek Parfit. Unlike with a lot of Indigenous thinking, actually, which has been long-term for centuries, he doesn't pay much attention to issues surrounding intergenerational justice. The upshot of his argument is that we should sacrifice now for the betterment of future generations. The Haudenosaunee call them the unborn faces. We should sacrifice now for those to come. But of course, the real question here is who sacrifices? And who maybe is sacrificing already in this era of unprecedented inequality and corporate power? So overall, what I'm suggesting is that right now might be one of those times in history when some of us might consider doing what many arts and humanities scholars chose to do during another period of phenomenal change, the civil rights era, let's say from the late 50s, 1950s. As that civil rights era revolution began to unfold, scholars chose to put their pens down and use their skills to help. They stopped studying what they were studying and they started looking at what mattered on the streets, what helped people to cope with the change that was coming surrounding civil rights. They started writing about gender, about Black history, about slavery, and with that oral history and LGBTQ+, though it wasn't necessarily called that then. And they started writing about Indigenous rights, and the whole civil rights list of topics goes on. We may be in a similar period when the tsunami of Fourth Industrial Revolution change may well mean that it's imperative that the arts and humanities train their attention in helping the world cope with these changes. Of course, the civil rights revolution is by no means directly comparable to the AI, quantum, and green technology revolution currently unfolding. But the urgent need for the best arts and humanities minds to apply themselves to unfamiliar areas of research like technology and its impacts, that remains. We need to be impacting debate in AI, for example, at the development and deployment stages, when systems are being generated, when values are being encoded, acceptable error rates are being agreed, not when it's too late and AI is already making decisions. AI is not, after all, apolitical, nor is it necessarily rational. Our input is needed far beyond AI as well, from decisions about robot rights to universal basic income, which may attend this revolution, to gene editing, to conservation, where there's increasing use of gene editing and changing species at a genetic level to conserve them, and the use of nanotechnology, full stop, which is, let's say, problematic and under-discussed. In essence, what I'm suggesting is that the arts and humanities help the world face this period of remarkable change by orientating around the moral values that are at the core of our respective fields. I also suggest that we consider embracing the sciences to the extent that we can understand them, and that we do so unashamedly, and that we open that interdisciplinary space wider continually. I think that the current generation of arts and humanities PhDs matter immensely in this, wherever they are housed, because at a time when the world really needs us, our numbers have become greatly thinned. One survey concluded that the number of students who obtained a humanities degree in 2002 in the US was down 25% from previously. And this is in a world where, according to the OECD, globally only 1% of the world has a PhD at all. So in sum, I agree with Carl Becker, who said in the Dial in 1915, the value of history, which is my discipline, is not scientific but moral. By liberalizing the mind, by deepening the sympathies, but fortifying the will, it enables us to control not society but ourselves, a much more important thing. We don't need to adopt either well or badly what the sciences are doing. What is needed now can be sui generis to the arts and humanities and centered around what the sciences can't provide. Irreducible moral worth informed by complexity, diversity, and that key thing, nuance. So thanks for listening, and this is a production from the Treated Spaces Research Group here at the University of Hull. Thank you.